On February 9, 1897, British soldiers invaded Benin and brought a classic end to the once powerful kingdom. However, before the invasion, the British and the people of Benin had a healthy trade relationship which started in the 16th century. The Benin sold mainly pepper, palm kernel oil, rubber, local cloth, ivory, timber and slaves to the British, who gave them matches, cutlery, small bells, drinking glasses, cowries and so on in return. Their relationship was also solidified with the introduction of Christianity by British Christian missionaries. This British-Benin relationship was sustained by trade and religion for centuries. Sadly, the relationship turned sour after the massacre of some British consular officials by Benin soldiers, which resulted in the punitive invasion of Benin. The aftermath of the invasion was the fall of the Benin Kingdom, putting an end to its existence as an independent entity and leading to the region's absorption into colonial Nigeria. The British romance with the Benins began in 1553 when the former sent out 2 ships to the Benin River under the command of Captain Thomas Windham. The then Oba of Benin, Oba Orogwa, welcomed them warmly and agreed to sell pepper to them. Sadly, Captain Windham and most of his crew members went down with a fever suspected to be malaria between 1553 and 1556, and almost 100 persons died from the sickness. This resulted in Queen Mary I of England prohibiting all voyages by her subjects to Benin due to the loss, but other European vessels still berthed at Benin and traded with them. After a while, the British resumed their visits, but the most impact was made by James Welsh and his crew, who were able to withstand the fever and from January to April 1591 carted 589 semmons of pepper, 32 barrels of palm oil, and 150 tusks back to their country. This success was the breaking ground for trade relations between the British and the Benin Kingdom for many years. Pepper was at first the major commodity of choice between the British and the Benin Kingdom. All the earlier voyagers had recorded successful collections of pepper, some gold and ivory, despite the health tragedy they suffered. Another notable item of trade were slaves. The slave trade was still in full force then, and English ships regularly came to Benin through the Ugoton seaport to the Benin River to buy slaves. In fact, the British paid twice the price for a slave than the Dutch. By the 1730s, they wholly dominated the business. Some of the slaves the Benin people sold were casualties of war, prisoners, and trade between neighboring states. Sometimes, slaves were presented as gifts to these foreigners. Ivory was another commodity that was in high demand, as also cloth, but all these items paled in comparison to the slavery business. Women slaves were sold more than the males, as the sale abroad had been forbidden since the 16th century. By the 1800s, regular trading with the British brought abundant prosperity to the Benin Kingdom, but midway through the century, the supply of slaves began to decline. English ships preferred to sail to Bonny, where they would get more slaves instead of the Benin River, which was running short of supplies. The Benin people had to even acquire slaves from the Ishekiris in order to meet up. The first reason for this shortfall was the embargo placed on the sale of male slaves by the Oba of Benin, which had been necessary as the kingdom had faced some military challenges, and it was imperative that the large army Oba Ozulua had commissioned be secured to handle threats from their enemies. Oba Akenzua I, who ruled from 1712 to 1740, lifted the ban during his reign. Another reason was the medical challenges the crew members faced whenever they anchored to the Benin River. Ugoton Seaport was soon viewed as a deadly zone due to the high death rate among traders stationed there. The third reason was the unhealthy state of the Benin River compared to other rivers, and only small ships could get to Ugoton Seaport, which prolonged the ships' stay at the port, completing their cargoes. The final reason that hit the nail on the proverbial coffin of slave trading was the prohibition of the trade by British ships. On the bright side, the abolition of the slave trade encouraged Liverpool merchants to develop trade in palm oil production on a commercial scale. The oil demand increased as it was being used to manufacture lubricants, margarine, soap, candles, and pharmaceutical products. The kernel was being used as livestock feed. The Benin people increased their production of palm oil to be able to have enough for both their consumption and for export to Europe. Hence, after the abolition of the slave trade, palm oil became an important item of trade between the British and the Benin Kingdom. Trade relations between both parties got a boost because of the abundant palm oil, which was necessary for industrial expansion. The Industrial Revolution that sprung up at the time led to the building of factories for mass production using machinery instead of the domestic production that was at play. At this time, the steam engine was invented, which paved the way for industrial mechanization. A new method of making steel was also discovered, and new and stronger tools and machinery were made in vast quantities to complement the modern types of machinery that were revolutionizing the agricultural sector and the weaving industry. With palm oil becoming the new substitute for slaves, the British-Benin trade relations were further strengthened. So, palm oil, elephant teeth and tusks, native cloths and utensils were often exchanged for European commodities. The Oba still held monopoly rights over certain items of trade, especially the oil palm and kernels in the waterside trade with the Europeans. Rubber trading was another feature of the British-Benin trade relations. The British invasion in 1897 opened up over 3,000 square miles of rubber forests. Exploits of the rubber forests at a commercial level intensified after the invasion and looting. Local production of rubber increased substantially to the extent that Yoruba and Calabar migrants were employed yearly for rubber tapping apart from the local Benin laborers. By the last quarter of the 19th century, Benin experienced the rubber boom with the invention of the pneumatic rubber tire by Scottish veterinary surgeon and inventor John Boyd Dunlop, which increased the demand for rubber. This breakthrough encouraged the British traders to promote their trade with Benin through their king, Oba Ovoramwe Nogbaisi, who had complete control over the Benin forest and must give approval, which he did. Another notable item of trade between the British and the Benin Kingdom was timber. The Benin forest boasted of a rich supply of timber reserves, which could be used for either domestic or commercial purposes. Mahogany in particular was in high demand and was shipped to Britain for manufacturing, furniture making, paneling, shipbuilding, and other construction activities. Other species such as obeche, iroko, and other species abound in the forest, making Benin a tourist attraction to European merchants and traders. Not to be left out was ivory, which was of great interest to the British traders. The ivory trade started around the 16th century and lasted till the end of the 19th century. It was reported that the Oba usually claimed one tusk on every elephant killed and bought the second one from the hunter. Therefore, there was a stockpile of ivory that had accumulated over the year. A lot was sold before the invasion, but even much more was looted after the fall of the Benin Kingdom. Other articles of trade were locally tapped wine, honey, plantains, oranges, yams, and locally made cotton cloth. As a means of exchange, the British brought into Benin a lot of luxury items such as Holland cloth, bracelets and necklaces, ironware, glass beads, cowries, knives, belts, red caps, canvas, scissors, drinking glasses, cutlery, mirrors, matches, hatchets, small bells, and so many others. Regardless of the healthy trade relations between the British and Benin, the love story ended in a tragedy when the British invaded the city in February 1897, burnt it up and left it in ruins. Trouble started when some Niger Coast Protectorate officials, led by the acting consul, General James Phillips, ran into an ambush at Ugbine. With the hidden intention to depose Oba Ovoramwen Nobaisi, who was the king at the time, Phillips sent messengers to inform the king of their arrival in a bid to see him. However, according to the Benin tradition, the people were celebrating the Agu festival and it was a taboo for the king to see strangers during the celebration. Oba Ovoramwe sent the messengers to inform General Phillips and his men that he would not be able to see them during the period until the next 2 months. Instead of the general to comply with the tradition of the people, he responded by saying that he would not wait for 2 months before seeing the king, as he had so much work to do in other parts of the protectorate and would prefer to speak with the king about several issues. The consul's message was viewed by the Benin royal house as a slap on their faces. Despite the intense warning from Oba Ovoramwen that none of the protectorate officials should be killed, Iyase, who was the war chief under the command of Olobosere and a senior army commander, saw the visit of the officials as a signal of war, and so he, along with some Benin warlords, ambushed the officials and killed them, all except 2 of them who ran into the forest. They hid in the forest for some days before escaping through Ugoton Creek. The response of the British to the massacre of the officials was to invade the city. Ignoring their long-standing view against the use of force, immediate steps were taken and a formidable force was assembled by the British to take down Benin City. Towards the end of the first week in February 1897, about 1,200 men, including Marines, sailors, and protectorate troops, were assembled and prepped for the assault. Rear Admiral Harry Rawson was appointed to lead the invasion, which was planned to take place from 3 fronts. The first column was to advance by way of the Olubo Creek. The second front was to advance by way of the Jemison River line up to Sakbomba, and the third was to maintain a joint attack through the Ugoto Creek. On February 9, 1897, the invasion finally started, and by the 18th of the same month, the Benin Kingdom fell, ceased to be an independent entity, and was annexed to the Niger Coast Protectorate. The city was set ablaze, although the British would later claim that it was accidental. Although the Benin soldiers put up stiff and heroic resistance to defend the sovereignty and territorial integrity of their kingdom from the invaders, Rawson's British troops had superior war weapons and were able to defeat them. The British Expeditionary Force looted the city of Benin during and after the invasion and carted away the city's precious artworks. Over 2,400 ivory, bronze, and wooden artifacts were stolen. Most of these stolen booties are today being sold out at auctions by European and American art collectors and exhibited in Western museums, mainly in Germany. Many buildings were burnt down, including the famous King's Court. Oba Ovoramwen was deported and exiled to Calabar, where he lived until he died in 1914. The Benin Native Council was then established to replace the institution of the monarchy and the absorption of the kingdom into colonial Nigeria. After the invasion and looting of Benin, the British then sought to make the whole of Nigeria a single colony and property of the British Empire, with the sacking of the Royal Niger Company in 1899 and the amalgamation of the Northern and Southern Protectorates in 1914. You can check out the full story in our next episode.